For 6 years, I paid every single bill while my mother lived in my house rent-free. I believed family meant loyalty, that taking care of your own was just what you were supposed to do. But on the night of my 33rd birthday, I stood in the hallway of my own home and overheard her whisper to my brother to change my locks before I got back from work. I smiled, cut my birthday cake, and waited, because the property deed held one massive secret they never knew. Before I tell you how I made them lose everything, take a moment to like and subscribe. If you have ever been the family ATM, drop a comment and let me know what state you are watching from and what time it is there. Your support means the world to me. Now let me take you back to the exact moment the illusion of my family completely shattered. I am Hannah. I am a 33-year-old senior bank auditor at a major financial firm. It was a miserable, rainy Friday night in November. I had just spent an hour and a half navigating gridlocked traffic to get back to my house in the suburbs. It was my birthday, a day when most people get to put their feet up and be celebrated. But in the Dixon family, I was always the one serving. I was standing in my hallway holding a massive heavy glass tray of baked ziti that I had spent 2 hours preparing the night before. The rich smell of melted mozzarella cheese, Italian sausage, and garlic should have made my mouth water, but I was just bone tired. I was tired from working 60-hour weeks examining corporate ledgers, and I was deeply tired of carrying the financial weight of my family. I had purchased this 4-bedroom house when I was 27 years old. I saved every penny I earned, skipped vacations, and drove a beat-up sedan just to afford the down payment. 2 years after I moved in, my mother Barbara called me crying. She said her landlord was raising her rent, and her part-time retail job was not covering her expenses. I told her to pack her bags. I gave her the primary guest suite with its own attached bathroom. I told her she did not have to pay me a dime in rent, so she could save her money and get back on her feet. Just a few months, we both agreed. That was 6 years ago. For 6 solid years, I paid the heavy mortgage. I paid the escalating property taxes. I paid the strict homeowners association fees. I bought the groceries, paid the electric bill, and covered the high-speed internet. My mother lived a life of absolute leisure, spending her days gardening in my backyard and having lunch with her church friends. I paused just outside the kitchen doorway to adjust my grip on the hot glass tray. That is when I heard the voices. My mother was in the kitchen talking to my older brother Greg. Greg is 35 years old. He refers to himself as a serial entrepreneur. In reality, he is a chronically unemployed man who relies on everyone else to fund his delusions of grandeur. He has burned through thousands of dollars trying to launch cryptocurrency platforms, drop shipping businesses, and fitness apps. Every single time he failed, my mother was right there to bail him out, usually by asking me for a temporary loan that was never repaid. My mother was speaking in a hushed, frantic whisper. I leaned closer to the wall, holding my breath. Change her locks on Monday while she is at the firm, my mother hissed. The paperwork is filed. It is your house now. The heavy glass tray almost slipped right out of my oven mitts. My stomach plummeted so fast, I felt physically sick. The hallway seemed to spin around me. My own mother, the woman who had been sleeping under my roof rent-free for 6 years, was plotting to lock me out of my own home. Inside the kitchen, Greg let out a low, arrogant laugh. I still cannot believe she never checks the county registry, he said. She is a bank auditor, for crying out loud. She is supposed to be the smart one. My mother scoffed, the sound sharp and cruel. Hannah is too busy working 60 hours a week to care about property records, she said. Besides, she is incredibly naive when it comes to family. She trusts me implicitly. Just get a locksmith out here by noon on Monday. You and Chloe can start moving your furniture into the master bedroom by Tuesday morning. I will pack up Hannah's clothes in black garbage bags and leave them on the front porch. She can afford to rent a small apartment downtown. It makes much more sense for you to have this big house now that you are getting married. Most people would have dropped the tray of food. Most people would have kicked the kitchen door wide open, screamed at the top of their lungs, and demanded a tearful explanation. I wanted to scream. The betrayal tore through my chest like jagged glass. The sheer cruelty of hearing my mother casually discuss throwing my belongings onto the porch on my birthday was paralyzing. But I did not scream. I am a senior bank auditor. My entire professional life is built on uncovering fraud, collecting irrefutable evidence, and remaining completely unemotional while I build airtight cases against white-collar criminals. My training kicked in instantly, completely overriding my emotional panic. I quietly set the hot tray of ziti down on the wooden console table in the hallway. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my smartphone. My hands were shaking violently, but I managed to open the voice memo application. I hit record. I held the phone toward the crack in the door, making sure the microphone captured every single word. Greg was pacing the kitchen floor. I can hear his heavy footsteps. "I already called the locksmith," Greg said proudly. "He quoted me $200 for the front and back doors. I am going to need to borrow that from you, Mom." Chloe maxed out our credit cards, paying for the wedding florist. "Do not worry about the $200, my mother replied softly. I transferred some grocery money from the joint account. Hannah set up for me. You just focus on getting this house ready for your new bride. You deserve a beautiful home, Greg. You have worked so hard." I stopped the recording. I immediately uploaded the audio file to a secure encrypted cloud server right there in the hallway. The daughter in me was dead murdered by the sound of my mother stealing my money to pay a locksmith to lock me out of my own property. In her place, a cold, calculating investigator was born. I took a deep, steadying breath. I picked the heavy tray of baked ziti back up. I pasted the brightest, most ignorant smile on my face, and I walked right into the kitchen. The sudden silence was absolutely deafening. Greg immediately jumped back from the kitchen island, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his face flushing guilty red. My mother practically leaped into the air. She quickly spun around and grabbed a dry dish towel, frantically pretending to wipe down a perfectly clean granite countertop. "Oh, Hannah," my mother gasped, her voice dripping with fake sugary affection. "You startled us. We were just talking about your birthday cake. Let me help you with that heavy tray, sweetheart. You must be so exhausted from working all day." I handed her the tray, looking her dead in the eyes. I said, "Thank you, Mom. You are always looking out for me." She did not even flinch. She took the food and ushered us into the dining room. Sitting at that dining room table was pure psychological torture. Every bite of the dinner tasted like ash and cardboard in my mouth. I sat at the head of the table and watched my brother pour himself a massive glass of my expensive red wine. He swirled it around in the crystal glass, looking around my dining room with the greedy, entitled eyes of a man sizing up his new kingdom. He complimented the height of the ceilings. He mentioned how much natural light the living room received. He spoke about my house as if he were a real estate agent showing it to a prospective buyer. The absolute audacity of his smugness made my skin crawl. "This is such a great space, Hannah," Greg said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "It really is a shame you do not entertain more often. A house like this should belong to someone who actually has a life. You know, someone who is building a family." I smiled at him, carefully cutting my pasta. "I work a lot, Greg," I said pleasantly. "Someone has to pay for the mortgage, the property taxes, and the wine you are currently drinking." My mother immediately slammed her fork down on her plate. She absolutely hated when I reminded Greg about my financial stability. "Hannah, please do not ruin a lovely family birthday dinner by bragging about your paycheck," she scolded sharply. "Your brother is under a lot of stress planning his wedding with Chloe. Money is not everything. Family is what truly matters. We have to support each other." Family. The word felt like a physical slap across the face. She was lecturing me about family loyalty and support while actively plotting to render me homeless in 3 days. I kept my smile locked firmly in place. I apologized sweetly. I stood up and brought out my own birthday cake. It was a simple chocolate cake I had picked up from the bakery near my office. As I sliced the cake and handed them their plates, I watched their body language closely. They were completely relaxed. They were arrogant. They truly believed I was a naive, workaholic spinster who existed solely to fund their lives and provide them with real estate. They had no idea that I was already mentally auditing them. I was already planning the absolute forensic financial destruction of their entire scheme. In my head, I was running through the fraud triangle: opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. My mother had the opportunity because she lived in my house. Greg had the pressure of an expensive wedding and no job, and they rationalized it by convincing themselves I owed them my life. The agonizing evening finally wound down. Greg announced he had to get back to his apartment to meet his fiancée. My mother walked him to the front entryway, handing him a massive container of leftover food that I had paid for and cooked. I stayed in the dining room pretending to clear the dessert plates. From the dining room window, I had a perfectly clear view of the front door. I watched Greg pause in the entryway. He did not just say goodbye and leave. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal measuring tape. I watched in absolute disgust as my unemployed brother stretched the yellow metal tape across the width of my solid oak front door. I was measuring the door frame. He was figuring out exactly what size deadbolt hardware he needed to buy to lock me out on Monday afternoon. He retracted the tape, slapped my mother on the shoulder, gave her a conspiratorial wink, and walked out into the rainy night. I stood completely alone in my dining room, holding a stack of dirty plates. My mother walked back in humming a cheerful little tune. She patted my arm and told me to leave the dishes in the sink. She said I should get some rest, because I had a very long week of work ahead of me. I agreed with her. I did have a long week ahead of me, but as I watched her walk up the stairs to sleep in the guest room, that my sweat and tears paid for a cold, calculated calm washed over my entire body. Greg was measuring my door. He truly thought he owned my house. I did not know exactly what forged or fraudulent paperwork my mother had filed behind my back at the county clerk office, but I knew one thing for absolute certain. When Monday morning came, they were not going to step on a naive pushover sister. They were going to step on a legal and financial landmine. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive gray sky that perfectly matched the cold weight sitting firmly in my chest. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the entire night sitting at my small mahogany desk in the downstairs office staring blindly at a stack of manila folders. As a senior bank auditor, I deal exclusively in facts and balanced ledgers and in undeniable proof. I desperately needed that factual grounding now. I had pulled out every single property record, every monthly mortgage statement, and the brand new county tax assessment that had arrived in the mail just 3 days ago. The printed numbers were stark, absolute, and unforgiving. I had paid out of pocket for absolutely everything for 6 unbroken years. I sat still and listened to the sounds of my house waking up above me. I heard the familiar creak of the hardwood floorboards as my mother walked down the hallway from the primary guest suite, a room I had custom painted in her favorite shade of sage green. I heard the delicate clinking of porcelain and the sharp hiss of the expensive espresso machine coming from the kitchen. She was making her morning cappuccino with the imported Italian beans I purchased for her every 2 weeks without complaint. The absolute normalcy of those domestic sounds made me physically nauseous. Just 12 hours ago, I had secretly recorded her plotting to hire a locksmith and throw my belongings onto the front porch in black garbage bags. Now she was casually steaming almond milk like she had not a single care in the world. I gathered the thick stack of financial papers, deliberately placing the most recent property tax bill right on top. I took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothed down the front of my practical gray sweater, and walked down the hall toward the kitchen. The rich smell of freshly baked blueberry muffins hit me first, a scent from my childhood that suddenly felt like a weapon. My mother was standing at the massive granite island wearing a luxurious silk robe that I had bought her for Mother's Day last year. She was humming softly to herself as she arranged the warm muffins on a tiered silver serving tray. She looked up when I entered the room, her face breaking into a bright, welcoming smile that did not quite reach her calculating eyes. "Good morning, Hannah," she said cheerfully, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You were up so late last night working in your office. I decided to bake your absolute favorite muffins to celebrate your birthday weekend properly. Sit down at the counter, sweetheart. Let me pour you a fresh cup of coffee." She was a master of the emotional pivot, An absolute genius at pretending everything was perfect while she quietly dismantled the lives of the people around her. But I was not a naive, eager-to-please 27-year-old girl anymore. I walked purposefully over to the kitchen island, bypassed the leather bar stool she affectionately patted for me, and dropped the heavy stack of financial documents right next to her elegant tiered tray of muffins. The thick stack of paper landed with a loud, heavy thud against the polished granite countertop, breaking the morning peace. Her warm smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered, wiping her manicured hands on a pristine linen dish towel. "What is all this paperwork, Hannah?" she asked, her voice dipping immediately into that maternal, condescending tone she always used whenever I attempted to discuss household finances. "We are trying to have a nice, peaceful Saturday morning together." "This is a nice, peaceful Saturday morning, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly calm, flat and professional. "But it is also a morning for absolute clarity." I tapped the top document with my index finger. "This is the annual property tax bill from the county assessor. It is due in exactly 3 weeks. It is for $8,400. My mother sighed loudly and waved her hand through the air, as if she were swatting away an annoying, persistent insect. "You make a very good salary at the financial firm, Hannah. You always manage these little administrative things so well. Why on earth are you bringing this up while I'm trying to serve you a nice birthday breakfast?" "Because I am exhausted from managing these things entirely alone," I said, looking her directly in her eyes. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the cool stone counter. "For 6 long years, you have lived in this beautiful house rent-free. When you first moved in, you looked me in the eye and said it would be for a few short months to help you get back on your feet after your landlord raised your rent. 6 years, Mom. In that time, I have paid every single mortgage installment without fail. I have paid the escalating property taxes. I have paid the strict homeowners association fees. I paid for the new roof last winter. I have covered the electric bill, the water bill, the high-speed internet, and every single bag of groceries in that pantry. You have not contributed a single dime to the maintenance or the financial survival of this property." Her face flushed a deep, angry red. She absolutely hated being confronted with reality. She vastly preferred the fictional narrative where she was the generous matriarch overseeing a successful family estate, rather than a permanent houseguest living entirely off her daughter exhausting 60-hour work weeks. "I am your mother," she snapped, abandoning the sweet baking mother persona entirely. "I raised you from an infant. I clothed you. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. Family does not keep a ledger, Hannah. Family does not keep score like some cold calculating banker. It is incredibly tacky and deeply disrespectful that you are standing in my kitchen waving a tax bill in my face after everything I have sacrificed to give you a good life." I stared at her, genuinely mesmerized by the sheer magnitude of her psychological gymnastics. She was standing in my kitchen lecturing me about family loyalty and tackiness, while secretly plotting to render me completely homeless by Monday afternoon. I kept my face entirely impassive. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I did not cry. I just let her angry words hang in the air between us, letting the heavy silence grow sharp and profoundly uncomfortable. "I am not keeping a ledger to be tacky, Mom," I finally said softly. "I am keeping a ledger because I am a senior bank auditor. It is quite literally my professional duty to track exactly where the money goes. And all of my money goes into this house, the house you are currently living in, for free." Instead of acknowledging my financial burden or showing a single ounce of gratitude, my mother performed one of her signature defensive maneuvers. She completely pivoted the conversation, launching an offensive attack from a totally unrelated angle. She smoothed the front of her silk robe, lifted her chin defiantly, and looked at me with an expression of pure dismissive entitlement. "Well, since you are so hyper-focused on the house today," she said sharply, "we need to talk about the garage. I need you to spend your weekend off clearing out the entire left bay. You need to box up your gardening supplies, your winter coats, and those old college boxes you have stored in the corner. You can rent a cheap storage unit downtown for your personal things." I blinked, genuinely thrown off balance by the sheer absurdity of the demand. "I am sorry, what did you just say? Why would I empty out my own garage and pay to rent a storage unit? Because Greg and Chloe desperately need the space, she said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if I were a particularly slow child. They have been receiving a massive amount of early wedding gifts. Chloe's wealthy parents have very generous friends, and they are sending beautiful, incredibly expensive items. Crystal vases, heavy stand mixers, entire matching sets of imported fine china. They cannot possibly keep all of those massive boxes in Greg's cramped little apartment. Chloe wants to store her wedding gifts here until they purchase a home of their own. The garage is the only logical place for them. The sheer audacity of the demand felt like a physical blow to my chest. She was not just ignoring my massive financial sacrifice. She was actively treating my hard-earned home like a free public storage facility for the brother who was actively trying to steal it from me. She wanted me to spend my precious birthday weekend packing up my own belongings, hauling them away in my car, and paying a monthly fee to a commercial storage company just so Chloe could have a highly convenient place to hoard her luxury wedding presents. I looked down at the warm blueberry muffins sitting on the tiered silver tray. I looked down at the expensive property tax bill. Then I looked back up at my mother. "No," I said. My mother's eyes widened in genuine shock. I rarely, if ever, said the word no to her. "What exactly do you mean, no? I just clearly explained to you that your brother needs the space for his future bride." "I mean absolutely no, Mom. I am not clearing out a single box from my garage. I am not renting a commercial storage unit. Greg and Chloe can easily rent their own storage unit for their luxury wedding gifts if they do not have the space in their apartment. This is my house. I pay the mortgage every month. I pay the property taxes. My personal belongings stay right where they are in my garage." "You are being incredibly selfish and petty," she hissed, slamming her hands down hard on the granite counter. "Your older brother is getting married. This is a crucial, stressful time for him. Chloe family is judging everything he does. He needs our full support right now. He needs to show them he comes from a family that has substantial resources and space. You are going to clear out that garage today, Hannah, or you and I are going to have a very serious problem." Before I could formulate a response to that ridiculous threat, the heavy wooden door leading from the hallway to the kitchen swung open violently. Greg marched into the room. He must have just arrived from his apartment, and he must have been standing quietly in the hallway, listening to the end of our argument. He was wearing an expensive-looking designer tracksuit that I knew for a fact he could not afford on his non-existent salary, and his chest was puffed out with an arrogant, aggressive energy that instantly changed the temperature of the room. "Is there a problem in here?" Greg demanded loudly, stepping right up to the kitchen island and glaring at me with dark, furious eyes. "Your sister is refusing to make a little bit of room in the garage for Chloe. Beautiful wedding gifts," my mother complained instantly, her voice immediately adopting a victimized, helpless whine. "She is being completely unreasonable, Greg. She is throwing tax bills in my face and telling me she will not help her own flesh and blood." Greg turned his full, intimidating attention to me. He was several inches taller than I was, and he always tried to use his physical presence to bully me into submission. He stepped closer deliberately, invading my personal space. His face twisted into an ugly, contemptuous sneer. "You really think you are something special, do you not?" "Hannah," he said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "You sit up there in your fancy corporate office looking at your little spreadsheets, acting like you run the entire world, just because you pay a few basic bills around here." "I pay all the bills around here, Greg," I corrected him, my voice remaining perfectly calm, refusing to take a single step backward despite his proximity. "And because I pay all the bills, I make the final decisions about what goes into my garage. Your fancy wedding gifts are not my financial or logistical responsibility. You are 35 years old. Figure out your own storage solutions like a functioning adult." Greg's face flushed a dark, dangerous red. The thick veins in his neck began to bulge against his skin. He absolutely hated being reminded of his age and his constant embarrassing financial failures. He leaned in so close I could smell the stale coffee and mint toothpaste on his breath. "You need to check your terrible attitude, little sister," he growled low in his throat, pointing a thick finger directly in my face. You walk around here acting like you own the damn place. You act like you hold all the cards just because your name was on the mortgage document 6 years ago." I stared at him, my heart pounding a slow, heavy, rhythmic beat against my ribs. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I noticed the highly specific past tense he just used. "Your name was on the mortgage document." Was, not is. Greg smiled then. It was a cold, cruel, completely triumphant smile. It was the distinct smile of a man who firmly believed he had already won the ultimate game. He dropped his hand, stuffed it deep into the pocket of his track pants, and took a step back, looking around my beautiful sunlit kitchen with an air of absolute possession. "You can refuse to clean out the garage today if you want to throw a childish tantrum," Hannah Gregg said softly, his deep voice echoing loudly in the suddenly quiet room. "But let me give you a piece of friendly advice. Do not get too comfortable throwing your weight around. You will not have a say in this house much longer." My mother gasped softly, casting a quick, panicked, warning glance at Greg. She knew he had just said far too much. She knew he was supposed to keep his arrogant mouth completely shut until the locksmith actually arrived on Monday afternoon. But Greg was simply too arrogant, too desperate to put his younger sister in her place to hold his tongue. He gave me one last smug, pitying look, reached out and grabbed a warm blueberry muffin right off the silver serving tray, and walked out of the kitchen whistling a cheerful little tune as he headed toward the backyard patio to eat it. My mother immediately started fussing with the complicated espresso machine, keeping her back firmly turned to me. She was frantically trying to pretend that the incredibly aggressive, legally threatening conversation had not just occurred right in front of her. She mumbled something incoherent about pouring my coffee and fetching the expensive butter for the muffins. I stood completely frozen by the kitchen island, my right hand resting heavily on top of the $8,000 property tax bill. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. My unemployed brother had just stood in my kitchen, a kitchen I had paid for with years of my own blood, sweat, and tears, and openly threatened my legal ownership of the property. He did not just think he was going to change the locks on Monday. He truly, genuinely believed he had the legal right to do so. "You will not have a say in this house much longer." The menacing words echoed relentlessly in my mind, ringing like a loud, persistent corporate alarm bell. My professional auditor instincts, the cold, hyper-analytical part of my brain that successfully dismantled massive corporate fraud for a living, took over completely. Emotional devastation was swiftly pushed aside. Deep familial betrayal was locked securely in a mental box. I was no longer a heartbroken sister dealing with a cruel, ungrateful family. I was a senior investigator actively looking at a fresh crime scene. People exactly like Greg, chronically unemployed narcissists who relied on my mother for weekly grocery money, did not make bold legal threats like that unless they thought they held an ironclad trump card. They had clearly done something behind the scenes. They had filed some sort of fraudulent paperwork. They had manipulated the county legal system behind my back using the ultimate perfect cover of my absolute trust in my own mother. I did not say another word to my mother. I did not drink the coffee she finally managed to pour. I picked up my heavy stack of financial documents, turned sharply on my heel, and walked straight back down the hallway to my home office. I closed the heavy wooden door and locked the deadbolt securely behind me. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It was Saturday morning. The county clerk and recorder physical offices were closed for the weekend, but they maintained an active online portal for public property records. It would cost me a small, non-refundable fee to run a full comprehensive title search on my own address, but I did not care about the money right now. I needed the absolute truth. My fingers flew rapidly across the keyboard as I logged into the secured county database. I carefully entered my specific property parcel number. I was going to find out exactly what kind of forged, fraudulent paper trail my mother and brother had left behind in the public registry. They foolishly thought I was just a naive, exhausted workaholic who never paid attention to the details. They were about to find out exactly what a senior bank auditor does when she catches someone trying to steal her life work. Monday morning arrived with a bitter, unforgiving chill that seeped right through the fabric of my tailored wool coat. I did not drive to my downtown office. I did not log into my corporate secure dashboard to begin my weekly financial audits. I had already called my department director at exactly 7 in the morning to request a personal day. Instead, I navigated my reliable sedan through the congested early morning traffic, heading straight for the massive concrete structure of the county courthouse. The weekend had been an agonizing exercise in psychological endurance. I had spent 48 hours pretending everything was perfectly normal in my house, smiling at my mother across the kitchen island, watching her water the indoor plants, knowing she was actively counting down the hours until she could legally lock me out of my own property. But the weekend was over. The municipal offices were finally open. I was no longer trapped in the agonizing limbo of Saturday and Sunday. It was time to deal exclusively in irrefutable facts. I parked in the municipal garage and walked through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. The building smelled of old paper floor wax and the heavy weight of local bureaucracy. I moved through the metal detectors with the practiced efficiency of a woman on a mission, bypassing the crowded courtrooms and domestic dispute offices, heading directly for the records department on the second floor. As a senior bank auditor, I spend my entire professional life tracing invisible lines of money and uncovering hidden corporate liabilities. People can easily lie to your face with a warm smile. Family members can manipulate you with tears and guilt. But filed property deeds are absolute. They represent the cold, hard truth stamped in permanent black ink. I approached the thick glass counter. Behind it sat a tired-looking clerk with graying hair and a name tag that read, Susan. I slid my state-issued identification card across the smooth counter surface. I asked her to pull the complete and total property title history for my residential address. Susan typed my address into her outdated computer system. Her keyboard clacked loudly in the quiet room. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting on the counter, my heart beating a slow and steady rhythm against my ribs. I watched her screen flicker. I watched her eyes narrow behind her reading glasses as she read the most recent entry. She frowned slightly, looked down at my identification card, and then looked back up at the computer monitor. She told me there had been a very recent update to the property title. She said a transfer document had been processed and formally recorded just last Thursday afternoon. I kept my voice entirely neutral. I asked her to print the physical document and provide me with a certified copy. I needed to hold the actual paper in my own hands. I needed to see exactly how my own mother had orchestrated the theft of my greatest financial asset. The printer whirred to life in the corner of the office. Susan retrieved the heavy stock paper, stamped it with the official county seal, and slid the small stack of documents across the counter. The top page was a standard quitclaim deed. I stared at the bold capitalized letters printed across the top of the form. A quitclaim deed is typically used to quickly transfer property between trusted family members without a traditional sale. I looked down at this grantor section. My full legal name, Hannah Dixon, was printed there as the person giving up the property. I looked at the grantee section. Gregory Thomas Dixon. My unemployed, perpetually failing older brother was listed as the sole recipient and new legal owner of the 4-bedroom home I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. The home I had paid the mortgage on for 6 unbroken years. The home where I had allowed my mother to live rent-free because I foolishly believed family meant loyalty. My eyes scanned down to the signature line. I expected to see a clumsy forgery of my own handwriting. I expected to see that my mother had simply traced my name and hoped the county clerk would not verify the signature. But Barbara was far more calculating than that. The signature on the grantor line belonged entirely to my mother. She had signed her own name, and right beneath her signature, she had printed the words acting as attorney-in-fact for Hannah Dixon. Attached to the back of the quitclaim deed was the mechanism she had used to bypass my authorization entirely. It was a copy of a durable general power of attorney document. I stared at that second page, and the sterile air in the courthouse suddenly felt incredibly thin. I could barely pull oxygen into my lungs. The betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath completely out of my chest, as the memory of that specific document rushed back into my mind. 7 years ago, when I was 26 years old, I was involved in a catastrophic car accident. A distracted driver ran a red light at a busy intersection and T-boned my small sedan at 50 miles per hour. I spent 3 agonizing weeks in the intensive care unit with a shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, and severe internal bleeding. I was heavily medicated, terrified, and facing multiple complex surgeries. Barbara had rushed to the hospital. She had stood by my bed crying, holding my hand, playing the role of the terrified, devoted mother to absolute perfection. Because I was going to be incapacitated and unable to manage my own affairs for several months, the hospital social worker advised me to assign a temporary power of attorney. I trusted my mother implicitly. I signed a comprehensive legal document granting her total control over my banking, my medical decisions, and my real estate, so she could pay my rent and handle my bills while I focused on surviving and learning how to walk again. 6 months later, after I was discharged and had completed my physical therapy, I went to my lawyer and formally revoked that specific power of attorney. The legal revocation was properly filed. My mother was officially stripped of her temporary authority. I thought the matter was completely closed. I thought it was just a dark chapter of my life firmly left in the past. But staring at the county records in my hands, the horrifying truth became undeniably clear. Barbara had kept a physical copy of the original unrevoked document. She had taken that powerful piece of paper, placed it in a secure drawer, and quietly held on to it for 7 long years. She had treated my near-fatal accident as a financial opportunity. She had kept the ultimate legal weapon hidden in her back pocket, just waiting for the perfect moment to use it against me. The premeditation was absolutely chilling. She did not just wake up last week and decide to help Greg steal my house on a sudden whim. She had possessed the means to destroy me for almost a decade. When Greg decided he desperately needed a large house to impress his wealthy new fiancée, Chloe, my mother simply reached into her drawer, pulled out the 7-year-old document, and walked into this very courthouse. She presented the outdated power of attorney to a clerk who failed to check the revocation registry. She signed my 6 years of financial sacrifice directly over to her favorite child without a single second of hesitation. She stole my home using the exact same document I had given her when I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. The sheer, unadulterated evil of that action was so profound it left me feeling physically numb. I stood at the counter tracing the official notary stamp with my index finger. The notary who had authorized the fraudulent transfer was a man named David Henderson. I recognized the name immediately. He was a senior member of my mother's church congregation. He was a man who frequently came over to my house for Sunday afternoon luncheons, eating the expensive groceries I had purchased. Barbara had used her social connections to find a friendly notary who would simply stamp the paperwork without asking difficult legal questions or requiring my physical presence. It was a perfectly executed insular conspiracy involving the people I was supposed to trust the most. They had all sat in my dining room, drank my wine, and smiled in my face while secretly orchestrating my total financial ruin. The clerk, Susan, had been watching my face closely. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the glass counter. Her expression shifted from bureaucratic boredom to genuine, deep concern. She had worked in the records department for a very long time. She knew exactly what a betrayed homeowner looked like. She reached out and gently tapped the glass separating us. "Excuse me, ma'am," Susan said, her voice dropping to a quiet, discreet whisper. "Are you all right? I noticed the date on that power of attorney is from 7 years ago. If you did not authorize this property transfer, you need to understand that this is a very serious crime. A fraudulently filed quitclaim deed can absolutely destroy your legal claim to the property if it is not challenged immediately. The person who filed this paperwork committed a massive felony." I looked up from the documents and met Susan's eyes. "I did not authorize this," I said calmly. "I formally revoked that power of attorney 6.5 years ago. The woman who filed this paperwork is my mother. The man she transferred the property to is my older brother. They are planning to change the locks on my front door this afternoon while I am at work. They firmly believe they have successfully stolen my home, and they think they are going to force me out into the street." Susan gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. The sheer cruelty of the situation cut right through her professional demeanor. She immediately straightened her posture, her eyes flashing with a sudden fierce sense of municipal justice. She reached toward her heavy black desk phone. "I am calling the county sheriff right now," Susan said firmly, picking up the receiver. "We can have deputies at your house in 20 minutes. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze the title. We can have your mother and your brother arrested for real estate fraud forgery and uttering a false document before lunchtime. You do not have to let them get away with this. I will gladly stand here and act as your official witness." It was the easiest, most logical path forward. I could simply nod my head, let Susan make the phone call, and watch the police drag my mother and Greg out of my beautiful house in handcuffs. I could let the criminal justice system handle the betrayal. I could reclaim my property today and sleep safely in my own bed tonight. The temptation was incredibly strong. But as I stood there in the quiet courthouse, my senior auditor training completely overrode my initial instinct for immediate messy revenge. When you catch a low-level corporate embezzler stealing a few $100s, you call security and escort them out of the building immediately. But when you discover a massive coordinated fraud conspiracy that threatens the entire foundation of a company, you do not act quickly. You do not show your hand right away. You quietly secure your evidence. You step back into the shadows. You carefully map out every single financial vulnerability the criminals have. And then you construct a trap so tight, so legally binding and so financially devastating that when you finally spring it, they are completely obliterated from every possible angle. Greg was chronically unemployed and desperate to impress his wealthy fiancée. He had absolutely no savings, no credit, and no assets of his own. He wanted to play the role of the successful homeowner. He wanted to strut around my property acting like a real estate mogul. He firmly believed that filing this fraudulent quit-claim deed gave him a free, clear, and unburdened multi-million-dollar asset. He was completely unaware of the massive hidden financial landmine that was securely attached to that specific property title. A landmine I had deliberately structured years ago to protect my investments. By legally claiming ownership of the house through this forged document, Greg had not just stolen the physical property. He had unwittingly assumed total immediate responsibility for a catastrophic amount of financial debt that was strictly tied to the title. Debt that was payable immediately upon transfer. Calling the police right now would stop the crime, but it would also stop the trap from closing around Greg's neck. If he was arrested today, he would just cry to the judge, claim ignorance, and let my mother take the fall. He would go right back to his miserable apartment and continue to play the victim. I did not want him to just face a minor legal hurdle. I wanted him to face total public unrecoverable ruin. I wanted him to lose his fiancée, his reputation, and every ounce of his arrogant pride in front of everyone he was trying to impress. And I wanted my mother to watch it happen, knowing her own treacherous actions had caused it. I reached across the counter and placed my hand gently over the telephone receiver, pressing it back down into the cradle. Susan looked at me, thoroughly confused and slightly alarmed. "No, thank you, Susan," I said, maintaining a perfectly pleasant professional smile. "Please do not call the police. I am not going to file a criminal report today." "But, ma'am," Susan protested, her voice rising with genuine concern, "you are going to lose your house. They are going to lock you out this afternoon. You cannot just let them do this to you." "I am not letting them do anything," I replied softly, carefully, gathering the certified copies of the fraudulent deed and sliding them into my leather briefcase. "I am a bank auditor, Susan. I deal with white-collar criminals for a living. If I call the police now, they will only face a simple fraud charge. But if I let my brother keep the house for a few more days, he is going to trigger a financial avalanche that will destroy his entire life. I am going to let him change the locks. I am going to let him throw his big housewarming party this weekend. I am going to let him believe he has won. I do not want to just stop a crime. I want to build a much bigger trap." I walked out of the county courthouse and stepped into the bitter wind of a late Monday morning. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me, shutting out the hum of municipal bureaucracy. I stood on the concrete steps for a long moment, just holding my leather briefcase tightly against my chest. Inside that briefcase was the certified copy of the forged quitclaim deed. It was the physical proof that my own mother had committed a felony to steal my home and give it to my unemployed brother Greg. I took a deep breath of the cold city air. I did not cry. I did not scream. The initial shock had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold and brilliant clarity. As I walked toward the parking garage, my mind naturally shifted into the familiar territory of numbers and ledgers. I am a senior bank auditor, and my entire life is built on tracking financial truths. For 6 long years, I had paid every single bill for that house while my mother lived there for free. During all that time, I kept a spreadsheet. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me needed to see it in black and white. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance premiums, and maintenance costs. I had sacrificed my youth, my vacations, and my peace of mind to provide a beautiful home for my family. And their gratitude was a forged signature and a plan to leave my belongings in garbage bags on the front porch. Docs. I got into my reliable sedan and locked the doors. I did not drive back to the financial firm where I worked. I had already taken a personal day, and I intended to use every single hour of it. I pulled out of the garage and navigated through the congested downtown traffic, heading toward the upscale business district. I was going to see my real estate attorney. His name was Richard Sterling, and he had handled all of my property transactions since I first started building my career. Richard was a man in his late 50s with silver hair, a sharp mind, and absolutely no tolerance for nonsense. He was exactly the kind of person I needed in my corner right now. The drive gave me time to think about Greg. My older brother was a man who lived entirely in a fantasy world. He constantly maxed out his credit cards on foolish business ventures that never generated a single dollar of profit. He wanted the prestige of being a homeowner without doing a single day of the hard work required to earn it. He truly believed that real estate was as simple as filing a piece of paper and changing the locks. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought that because I was his younger sister, I would just roll over and accept my defeat. He was completely unaware of the financial landmine he had just stepped on. I arrived at Richard's Sterling office building and took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The reception area was quiet and smelled faintly of expensive leather and polished mahogany. I greeted the receptionist, and she immediately ushered me back to Richard's private office. He was sitting behind his massive desk reviewing a thick stack of commercial lease agreements. He looked up and smiled warmly when I walked in, but his smile faded the second he saw the expression on my face. He took off his reading glasses and set them carefully on his desk. "Hannah," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from him, "you look like you are preparing for a corporate war. Sit down and tell me exactly what is going on." I did not waste any time with small talk. I opened my briefcase, pulled out the certified copy of the forged quitclaim deed, and slid it across the smooth surface of his desk. "I want you to look at this, Richard," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It was filed with the county clerk last Thursday afternoon." Richard picked up the document. His experienced eyes scanned the paper, taking in the grantor, the grantee, and the notary stamp. I watched his brow furrow in deep confusion. "Hannah," he said slowly, "you transferred your primary residence to your brother Gregory. Why would you do this without consulting me first? You are giving away a massive asset for absolutely zero consideration." "I did not transfer anything," I replied. My hands were resting calmly on my lap. "That is not my signature on the grantor line. That is my mother's signature. She used an old durable power of attorney that I gave her 7 years ago when I was hospitalized after my car accident. I formally revoked that document 6 months after I recovered, but she kept a physical copy hidden in a drawer. She took it to a notary from her church, and she fraudulently signed my house over to my brother. They are planning to change the locks on my doors this afternoon, while they think I am sitting at my desk at the bank." Richard stared at me in absolute stunned silence. He looked down at the forged deed and then looked back up at my face. The color slowly drained from his cheeks as the reality of the crime set in. He dropped the paper onto his desk like it was actively on fire. "Hannah, this is a massive felony," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "This is clear and undeniable title fraud. Your mother has committed forgery, and your brother is the beneficiary of stolen real estate. We need to call the district attorney right now. We need to file an emergency injunction to freeze the title, and we need to have the police waiting at your house to arrest them the second they try to change those locks." I shook my head slowly. "No, Richard," I said. "I do not want to call the police today. I do not want to stop them from changing the locks. I want them to believe they have won." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, looking at me like I had lost my mind. "You want to let them steal your house?" he asked in disbelief. "You want to let your brother lock you out of your own property? Hannah, you are a bank auditor. You know exactly how dangerous this is." I smiled then, and it was not a warm smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of a woman who was about to execute a flawless financial trap. "I know exactly how dangerous it is for them," I corrected him. "Richard, you are forgetting the most important detail about how we structured the financing when I originally purchased this house 6 years ago. I want you to open my client file and look at the encumbrances recorded against the property title." Richard hesitated for a moment, but he turned to his computer and typed rapidly on his keyboard. He pulled up my secure client file and opened the specific folder containing my real estate closing documents. I sat perfectly still and waited as he read through the digital paperwork. When I bought the house, I did not just sign a standard mortgage with a traditional retail bank. As a financial professional, I knew that life was unpredictable, and I wanted an extra layer of asset protection. I had used my own savings and a private commercial loan to purchase the property in cash. But immediately after the purchase, Richard and I had legally recorded a massive mortgage lien against the house. We recorded a $350,000 deed of trust. But the lender on that recorded deed of trust was not a bank. The lender was a private financial entity called Oakwood Financial Limited Liability Company. Oakwood Financial is a private holding company that I created. I am the sole owner, the sole managing member, and the sole decision maker for Oakwood Financial. On public records, it looks like my house is heavily mortgaged by an independent corporate lender. In reality, I am my own bank. I hold the mortgage on my own house. I watched the exact moment Richard remembered the structure. His eyes widened, and a slow, brilliant smile began to spread across his face. He looked at the computer screen, and then he looked back at the forged quitclaim deed sitting on his desk. "Oakwood Financial," he whispered, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the desk. "You hold a primary recorded lien of $350,000 against the property." "Yes, I do," I replied softly. "And because my mother filed a fraudulent quitclaim deed to transfer the physical title of the property to Greg, she triggered a very specific clause in my mortgage contract." Richard began to nod slowly, the legal mechanics falling perfectly into place in his mind. "The due on sale clause," he said, his voice filling with a dark professional satisfaction. "Exactly," I said. "The due on sale clause dictates that if the title of the property is transferred, sold, or given away to a new owner, without the explicit written permission of the lender, the entire remaining balance of the mortgage becomes due and payable immediately. Greg thinks he just got a free multi-million-dollar house." I continued, keeping my voice steady and cold. "He wants to play the role of the wealthy real estate owner for his new fiancée. He wants to walk around my hardwood floors and act like a successful entrepreneur. But he did not read the title history. By legally claiming ownership of that property through this forged deed, he did not just steal a house. He fraudulently assumed a massive corporate debt." Richard was actually chuckling now, a low sound of pure legal appreciation. "Because he is claiming to be the new legal owner, he is now entirely responsible for satisfying the liens attached to the property," Richard explained. "And because Oakwood Financial did not authorize this transfer, Oakwood Financial has the absolute legal right to demand full immediate payment of the $350,000 debt. And Greg does not have $350 in his checking account, let alone $350,000, I pointed out. He is completely broke. He relies on my mother to buy his groceries. When he cannot pay the debt within the standard 48-hour cure period, what happens next, Richard? Richard folded his hands together, resting them on top of the forged deed. Oakwood Financial initiates immediate hostile foreclosure proceedings, he said. We file a notice of default. We place a devastating mark on his public financial record. And because he assumed this debt through a proven act of felony forgery, the foreclosure will not just ruin his credit score. It will trigger a massive civil fraud lawsuit that will bankrupt him for the rest of his natural life. He will owe you the house, the legal fees, the punitive damages, and he will still face criminal prison time when we finally hand this over to the district attorney. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since my birthday dinner finally began to lift. This was not just about getting my house back. This was about absolute financial justice. My family had treated me like an endless ATM. They had taken my money, my time, and my peace of mind, and they had done it all while making me feel like I was the one who owed them. They wanted to steal my greatest asset because they thought I was too busy and too naive to fight back. They were about to learn that you never commit financial fraud against a senior bank auditor. So we let him change the locks, I asked, looking directly at my attorney. Richard nodded firmly. We let him change the locks. We let him move his clothes into your master bedroom. We let him invite his fiancée and her wealthy parents over to celebrate his big success. We let him establish unquestionable physical and legal possession of the property under the fraudulent deed. The deeper he digs himself into this lie, the tighter the trap closes around his neck. I want the legal notices drafted today, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out my checkbook. I want the demand for payment drawn up on the official Oakwood Financial corporate letterhead. I want the notice of default and the intent to foreclose prepared and ready to be served. Richard was already pulling fresh legal pads from his drawer and clicking his pen. I will draft the acceleration notice myself, he said. We will give him exactly 48 hours to produce $350,000 in certified funds. When he inevitably fails to produce the money, we will send a licensed process server to hand-deliver the foreclosure and fraud lawsuit documents directly to him. I want him served publicly, I said, my voice dropping to a hard whisper. He is throwing a massive housewarming barbecue this coming Saturday. He invited our entire extended family and his fiancée parents. He wants to show off his stolen wealth to everyone he knows. I want the process server to walk right into my backyard and hand him his financial death warrant in front of his entire audience. Richard smiled a sharp, predatory smile. Consider it done, Hannah. I will hire the best process server in the city. We will make sure the delivery is completely legal, beautifully timed, and impossible to ignore. For the next 2 hours, Richard and I sat in that quiet office and drafted the legal paperwork. We were meticulous. We checked every single statute regarding title fraud, unauthorized property transfers, and immediate debt acceleration. I provided Richard with all the official corporate documentation for Oakwood Financial, proving my absolute authority to call in the massive loan. We built an airtight, inescapable legal box around my brother and my mother. There would be no loopholes. There would be no plea bargains. There would be no family guilt trips to save them. When the documents were finally finished and signed, I stood up and shook Richard's hand. I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked out of the law firm and stepped back into the cold afternoon air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from an automated security application I had installed on my front door. The alert read that the primary deadbolt had been removed and replaced. Greg had done it. He had actually hired the locksmith and changed my locks. He was standing inside my house right now, believing he was the king of the castle. I looked down at the notification and I smiled. The trap was officially set. The timer was ticking. I just had to check into a hotel and wait for Saturday to arrive. The drive home from the financial district on Monday afternoon felt like navigating through a thick fog of surreal anticipation. The sky above the Boston suburbs was a heavy bruised purple, threatening a cold rain that perfectly matched the hollow chill settling into my bones. I sat behind the wheel of my reliable sedan, watching the familiar brake lights of the commuter traffic flare and fade. For 6 years, this drive had been my daily routine. A 60-hour work week, followed by an hour of gridlock, just so I could return to the beautiful 4-bedroom home I had purchased with my own relentless hard work. It was the home where I had generously allowed my mother to live rent-free. It was the home I was currently driving toward, knowing full well that an unthinkable crime was actively taking place behind its front door. My real estate attorney, Richard, and I had spent the entire morning drafting the foreclosure documents and the notice of debt acceleration for Oakwood Financial. The legal trap was completely primed and waiting. But understanding a betrayal on a sterile legal document is entirely different from facing the physical reality of your own family, locking you out of your life. As I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street, my heart began to pound a slow and heavy rhythm against my ribs. The manicured lawns and quiet driveways of my neighborhood looked perfectly normal. But as my own house came into view, the illusion of suburban peace was violently shattered. There, sitting on the pristine brick porch of the house I paid for, were 6 heavy-duty black garbage bags. They looked like massive lumpy boulders barricading my own front door. I pulled my car into the driveway and shifted into park. I did not turn off the engine right away. I just sat there gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white, staring through the windshield at those black plastic bags. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect of it took my breath away. They had not packed my belongings into boxes. They had not folded my clothes. They had ripped through my intimate personal spaces, emptied my closets, and shoved my life into bags designed for literal trash. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the cold, analytical side of my brain to take control. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly up the concrete path toward the porch. The wind had picked up, carrying the bitter scent of wet asphalt and impending rain. As I stepped onto the brick porch, I saw that one of the bags had caught on a stray nail and torn open. Sticking out of the jagged plastic was the sleeve of my expensive navy blue suit jacket, the one I wore to present audit findings to corporate board members. The fine wool fabric was dragging against the dirty brick covered in a fine layer of dust. Next to it, a pair of my running shoes was tossed carelessly on top of a tangled pile of my silk blouses. They had rummaged through my most personal belongings with absolute disregard, treating my hard-earned property like garbage to make room for my chronically unemployed brother and his wealthy fiancée. I stepped over the bags and approached the heavy, solid oak front door. My hand was trembling slightly as I reached into my purse and pulled out my silver house key. I slid the metal key into the brass lock. It went halfway in and stopped dead. I pulled it out and tried again, pushing with a little more force. The key refused to turn. I leaned closer, inspecting the hardware. The brass housing was brand new. It was shiny and completely devoid of the tiny familiar scratches my key had made over 6 years of daily use. Greg had actually done it. He had taken the grocery money my mother stole from my joint account, and he had paid a professional locksmith to change the deadbolts on my house while I was sitting at my desk earning the money that kept them all fed. Above the new lock, the blue LED ring of the doorbell camera illuminated, casting a faint glowing circle in the gathering dusk. The mechanical eyes stared at me, unblinking and cold. I knew Greg was inside. I knew he was staring at his smartphone screen, watching me stand on the porch. I knew my mother was likely standing right behind his shoulder, holding her breath, waiting to see my spirit break. As a senior bank auditor, I am trained to remain completely impassive in the face of hostility. I could have easily looked directly into that camera, stated the legal statutes they were violating, and walked away. But I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to believe their fraudulent scheme had worked flawlessly, so they would fully commit to their false ownership. I needed undeniable recorded evidence of Greg claiming the property under false pretenses. I let my shoulders slump forward. I allowed the genuine grief and betrayal I felt to rise to the surface of my face. I reached out and pressed the doorbell button. The familiar chime echoed loudly through the heavy oak door. I waited, shivering slightly in the cold evening wind. A few seconds later, the speaker on the camera crackled to life. "What do you want?" Hannah Gregg demanded. His deep voice filtered through the small speaker, dripping with unearned authority and smug arrogance. I looked directly into the camera lens, forcing my voice to tremble. "Greg, my key is not working," I said loudly, ensuring the microphone picked up every word. "Why are all my clothes outside in garbage bags? Open the door right now. It is cold, and it is about to rain. You do not live here anymore," Greg barked, his voice carrying a harsh, aggressive edge that echoed across the quiet porch. "What are you talking about?" I pleaded, resting my hand against the cold wood of the door. "This is my house. I pay the mortgage. Open the door. Greg, please." "Not anymore, little sister," he sneered, the sheer triumphant cruelty in his tone, making my stomach churn. "The paperwork is filed with the county. I am the legal owner of this property now. You need to gather your trash and get off my property before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing." The confession was perfect. He had just stated his claim of ownership through the forged paperwork clearly and aggressively on a cloud-recorded video file. But I needed to push the performance just a little further to secure the absolute devastation of his ego. "You cannot do this to me," I cried, letting genuine tears of frustration well up in my eyes. Mom, are you in there? Please talk to me. You promised me this was just a temporary living arrangement for you. You cannot let him steal my house." The speaker remained silent for a long, agonizing moment. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Greg laughing in the background. They were enjoying this. They were actively savoring the moment they rendered me homeless on a Monday evening. They truly believed I was weak and helpless. My smartphone suddenly vibrated violently in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. The bright screen illuminated my face in the darkness. It was a text message from my mother, Barbara. I opened the message and read the words that would officially sever our relationship forever. "Greg needs this house for his marriage, Hannah. You make a massive salary at the financial firm. You can easily afford to rent a nice apartment downtown. Stop causing a dramatic scene on the front porch and embarrassing the family. Be a good sister for once and let your brother have his moment. Do not contact us again until you are ready to apologize for your selfishness." I stood completely still on the porch, reading those sentences over and over again. The psychological gymnastics required to send that message were absolutely staggering. She was standing inside a multi-million-dollar home that I had paid for, watching her unemployed son lock me out in the cold, and she was lecturing me about being a good sister. She was actively characterizing my resistance to felony real estate fraud as selfishness. She was demanding an apology from the daughter she had just robbed blind. She had used my financial stability, the stability I sacrificed my youth and my peace of mind to build, as the moral justification to steal from me. Because I could survive the theft, she believed she had the right to commit it. I looked away from the phone and stared at the heavy wooden door. The tears dried on my face, instantly evaporated by a sudden, overwhelming wave of cold, hard clarity. The grieving daughter, who just wanted her family to love her, was officially dead. The senior bank auditor had taken full, complete control. I looked up at the blue glowing ring of the camera one last time. I let a look of absolute, crushing defeat wash over my features. I hung my head low, acting exactly like the broken, exhausted woman they expected me to be. I turned around and walked over to the heavy black garbage bags. The physical labor of carrying those bags to my car was exhausting. Each bag was incredibly heavy, packed haphazardly, with shoes, books, and expensive professional clothing. I dragged them down the concrete path one by one, lifting them into the trunk of my sedan. The rain finally began to fall, a cold, steady drizzle that soaked my hair and chilled my skin. I did not rush. I played the part perfectly, letting my shoulders drag, looking back at the house with a deeply mournful expression. It took me nearly 20 minutes to load all my belongings into the vehicle. When the last bag was securely in the trunk, I slammed the lid shut. I walked to the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat. I started the engine and turned the heater on high, letting the warm air blast across my frozen hands. I pulled my phone out and took one final look at my mother text message. "Be a good sister for once." I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed out of the driveway, leaving my beautiful home behind in the rearview mirror. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, navigating the winding suburban streets until I reached the main highway heading back toward the city center. As the miles put distance between me and my toxic family, the heavy, suffocating weight I had been carrying for 6 years finally began to lift. I was no longer responsible for funding their lives. I was no longer obligated to smile through their entitlement. They had drawn the battle lines and they had fired the first shot. But they were fighting a war they could not possibly comprehend. I drove straight to an upscale luxury hotel in the heart of the downtown financial district. I handed my credit card to the front desk clerk and booked a premium suite for the entire week. I was not going to suffer in a cheap motel. I was going to sleep in a king-sized bed, order expensive room service, and manage my financial counterattack from a position of absolute comfort. Once I was settled in the quiet, elegant hotel room, I opened my laptop and connected to the secure wireless network. It was time to initiate the financial squeeze. Greg and my mother firmly believed they had won the ultimate victory. They thought changing the deadbolts and ignoring my tears meant the house was theirs free and clear. They thought they had successfully executed a flawless theft. They did not realize that by legally claiming the property through that forged quitclaim deed, Greg had just stepped squarely onto a $350,000 financial landmine. And from the comfort of my luxury hotel suite, I was about to trigger the explosion that would reduce their entire arrogant world to ash. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown hotel suite on Tuesday morning. I woke up in a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, feeling a strange sense of absolute weightlessness. For the past 6 years, my mornings always began with a crushing sense of obligation. I would wake up at the crack of dawn, navigate the long commute from the suburbs, and sit at my desk at the financial firm just to ensure the mortgage was paid on a house that my mother treated as her own personal resort. Today was entirely different. I was not rushing to make coffee for ungrateful house guests. I was not quietly packing a cheap lunch to save money for my brother and his inevitable emergency loans. I ordered a premium room service breakfast. I drank expensive dark roast coffee from a porcelain cup, and I sat by the window looking down at the bustling city streets below. My mother and my brother firmly believed that locking me out of the house in the rain was the final chapter of our story. They thought my tears on the front porch meant I was defeated and broken. They had absolutely no idea that those tears were the last pieces of the devoted daughter they had abused for a decade. The woman sitting in the hotel suite was a senior bank auditor preparing to completely dismantle their stolen lives. I opened my laptop and connected to the secured hotel network. A house is a massive financial machine, and for 72 months I had been the sole engine keeping that machine running. It was time to systematically shut down every single valve. I started with the electric company. I logged into my residential account portal. I stared at the billing history for a long moment. Hundreds of dollars every single month just so my mother could run the central air conditioning at freezing temperatures all summer and keep the heat blasting all winter. I clicked on the Service Termination tab. The system prompted me for a reason. I typed a simple, clear sentence stating that I was no longer the legal owner of the property and the new owner had taken possession. I selected immediate termination. The confirmation screen appeared instantly. Within the hour, the power grid to the house would be completely severed. There would be no lights, no air conditioning, no refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Next, I navigated to the Municipal Water and Sewer Department website. My brother loved taking 45-minute hot showers every morning while he supposedly brainstormed his failed entrepreneurial ventures. My mother spent hours watering her expensive imported rose bushes in the backyard, using the irrigation system I had paid to install. I removed my credit card from the automatic payment registry and submitted the formal shut-off request. The water supply would be restricted by noon. I then moved on to the high-speed internet provider. Greg relied entirely on my premium gigabit connection to play video games, trade worthless cryptocurrency, and boast on social media about his fake business success. Canceling the internet was perhaps the most satisfying click of the entire morning. I watched the status indicator turn from active to disconnected. I could perfectly picture Greg sitting in my living room staring in sheer panic at his blank computer screen as his digital world vanished. But the most critical step was the homeowner's insurance. When you own a property, you are legally required to carry comprehensive liability and damage coverage. But my mother had filed a forged quitclaim deed transferring the physical title to Greg. Because my name was no longer on the county deed, I no longer had an insurable interest in the physical structure. It is a fundamental rule of finance and property law. I called my insurance broker directly. I informed him that the property had been legally transferred to a Gregory Dixon, and I demanded an immediate cancellation of my policy. He processed the request without hesitation. The house was now completely exposed. If a pipe burst, if a fire started, if someone slipped on the front walkway, Greg was entirely and personally liable for every single penny of the damage. They wanted to steal a multi-million-dollar asset without understanding the massive responsibilities that came with it. I was simply letting them experience the true weight of homeownership. With the basic utilities severed, I turned my attention to the most powerful weapon in any upscale American suburb: the local homeowners association. The neighborhood I lived in was governed by a notoriously strict and unforgiving board of directors. These were retired professionals who spent their days measuring grass height, enforcing paint color codes, and patrolling the streets for any minor infraction of the community bylaws. For 6 years, I had meticulously followed every single rule to avoid their wrath. Now I was going to point their absolute fury directly at my brother. I opened my email client and drafted a highly formal message to the president of the association. I attached a certified digital copy of the forged quitclaim deed that my mother had filed at the courthouse. I politely informed the board that I was no longer the owner of the residence and that a man named Gregory Dixon had taken sudden possession of the property. I highlighted the specific community bylaws, stating that any transfer of ownership required prior board approval, an extensive background check, and a mandatory orientation meeting. Greg had completely bypassed all of this. I did not stop there. I also attached a clear photograph I had taken before leaving the house yesterday evening. The picture clearly showed Chloe and her expensive sports car parked aggressively across the front lawn and blocking the neighborhood sidewalk. The association had a zero-tolerance policy for illegal parking and unapproved vehicles. I sent the email and poured myself another cup of coffee. The response arrived in less than 20 minutes. The board president was absolutely livid. He thanked me for the notification and immediately issued a formal violation notice to the property. Because Greg was an unauthorized occupant violating the strict transfer bylaws, the association levied an immediate daily fine of $500 against him. Furthermore, the president confirmed that a private towing company had been dispatched to remove Chloe and her vehicle from the grass. The suburban warfare had officially begun. The bureaucratic machine was now tightening its grip around Greg and his stolen kingdom, and I had not even sprung the real financial trap yet. I spent the rest of the day reviewing corporate audit files for my actual job, enjoying the quiet luxury of my hotel room. I ordered a fresh turkey club sandwich for lunch and watched the city traffic far below. I knew exactly what was happening at the house. The temperature inside the rooms was slowly rising as the afternoon sun beat down on the roof. The food in the refrigerator was beginning to sweat and spoil. The toilets would not flush. The televisions and computers were dead pieces of plastic. They were sitting in a dark, silent oven completely cut off from the modern world. I knew Greg and his massive ego were rapidly cracking under the pressure of Chloe and her complaints. She was a wealthy girl who demanded constant comfort, and Greg was currently failing to provide even the most basic necessities in the house he claimed to own. My mother was likely pacing the dark hallways, realizing that stealing a house was much easier than actually running one. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, my cellular phone began to vibrate across the glass desk. The caller identification displayed my brother and his familiar phone number. I let it ring 4 times, letting his anxiety build before I calmly answered the call. I did not say hello. I just listened. The background noise on the other end of the line was absolute chaos. I could hear my mother crying loudly, complaining that her expensive frozen meats were melting and ruining the hardwood floor as the freezer defrosted. I could hear Chloe shrieking in the distance, demanding to know why her car had just been dragged away by an aggressive tow truck driver. And over all of it was the sound of Greg breathing heavily, his voice tight with a mixture of raw panic and blind rage. "Hannah, what the hell did you do?" he screamed into the receiver. His deep voice cracked, betraying his absolute desperation. "The power is completely gone. The water is shut off. The internet is dead. And some crazy old man in a golf cart just drove by and taped a massive yellow fine to the front door telling me I am trespassing. Call the electric company right now and turn the power back on." Chloe is sweating through her expensive clothes, and she is threatening to go stay at a hotel. "You need to fix this right now, or I swear to God I will make you pay." I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water. I kept my voice incredibly flat, entirely stripped of any sibling affection or emotional distress. "I am not calling anyone, Greg," I replied smoothly. "You stood on the front porch yesterday and proudly declared into a security camera that the paperwork was filed and you were the legal owner of the property. You changed the deadbolts. You threw my personal belongings into garbage bags. You demanded that I get off your land. Well, you got exactly what you wanted. You are the homeowner now, Greg. Figure it out." There was a long, agonizing silence on the phone. The reality of his situation was finally crashing through his delusions of grandeur. He had no money to open new utility accounts. He had no credit score to satisfy the strict deposit requirements of the municipal water department. He had absolutely no way to pay a $500 daily fine to the association. He was a broke, unemployed man playing a dangerous game of real estate dress-up, and the costume was rapidly falling apart. But men like my brother do not possess the capacity for self-reflection or accountability. When they are backed into a corner by their own profound incompetence, they do not surrender. They double down on their own arrogance. He could not admit to Chloe that he was a fraud who relied entirely on his younger sister to pay the bills. His fragile ego simply would not allow it. "You think you are so smart, do you not?" "Hannah," he growled, his voice dropping to a vicious, defensive whisper. "You think shutting off the lights is going to break me? You think you can embarrass me in front of my future wife? Well, you are completely wrong. I do not need your money, and I do not need your help. I am going to call the utility companies myself and put everything in my name where it belongs. I am going to pay whatever fees they want. And just to prove how pathetic and bitter you are, I am throwing a massive housewarming barbecue this coming Saturday." Howe was rambling now, desperately trying to convince himself that he was still in control. "I am inviting Chloe and her entire family," he continued, his voice rising with false bravado. "I am inviting all of our relatives. I am going to rent a massive industrial generator if I have to. I am going to buy the most expensive steaks in the city, and I am going to show everyone that I am a highly successful man who owns a beautiful home. You are not invited, Hannah. You can sit in whatever cheap hotel room you rented and cry about how you lost everything. I am the king of this house now, and Saturday is going to be the greatest day of my life." He slammed the phone down, terminating the call. I slowly lowered my phone to the desk, and a genuine wide smile spread across my face. He had taken the bait perfectly. I did not want him to retreat. I did not want him to quietly realize his mistake and try to undo the forged paperwork. I wanted him to loudly, proudly, and publicly claim ownership of that house in front of the largest audience possible. By inviting Chloe and her wealthy, judgmental parents and our entire extended family to a massive barbecue, he was constructing the exact stage I needed for my final act. He wanted to show them his stolen wealth. He wanted to parade around the backyard acting like a self-made millionaire. Howe was going to spend whatever little credit he had left on generators and expensive meat, completely unaware that the countdown timer on my $350,000 mortgage lien was rapidly ticking down to zero. He had exactly 48 hours before the corporate demand for payment expired. The legal foreclosure documents were already printed, sitting neatly in my leather briefcase. I had cut his lifelines to let him feel the squeeze, but Saturday was the day the trap would permanently snap shut. I closed my laptop feeling an incredible sense of peace. The storm was coming for the Dixon family, and I was the one holding the lightning. Saturday afternoon arrived with a brilliant, unclouded sky that felt entirely too cheerful for the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my downtown hotel suite, examining my reflection with a cold, critical eye. I was not wearing the exhausted, practical clothes of a woman who worked 60-hour weeks to quietly support an ungrateful family. I was wearing armor. I had purchased a tailored navy blue suit, crafted from a gorgeous wool and silk blend. The dark fabric draped perfectly, projecting an image of absolute corporate authority and financial success. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and a pair of classic black pumps. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight bun, leaving no room for softness or hesitation. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was no longer a heartbroken daughter or a bullied younger sister begging for scraps of appreciation. She was a senior bank auditor preparing to liquidate a fraudulent asset. I checked my leather briefcase one final time, ensuring the heavy stack of legal documents was perfectly organized. The official notice of default, the demand for immediate payment of $350,000 in certified funds, the formal intent to foreclose from Oakwood Financial. Everything was immaculate. I grabbed my car keys and walked out of the hotel room, feeling a profound sense of calm. The emotional grief that had threatened to drown me earlier in the week had completely evaporated, leaving behind a laser-focused determination. I drove out of the city and navigated the familiar winding roads toward the affluent suburbs. As I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street, I did not feel a single pang of nostalgia for the home I had built. The battle lines had been permanently drawn, and I was returning exclusively to finish the war. I parked my sedan 3 blocks away from the property, deliberately leaving the street clear for the massive spectacle unfolding ahead. Even from several hundred yards down the road, I could hear the deafening mechanical roar. It was the distinct heavy rumble of a massive industrial diesel generator. Greg had actually done it. He had spent money he did not have to rent a commercial-grade power source just to keep his delusional housewarming barbecue alive. As I walked closer, the sheer absurdity of the situation came into full view. Cars were parked haphazardly, along both sides of the street, stretching all the way around the cul-de-sac in direct violation of the strict neighborhood bylaws. I easily recognized the luxury vehicles belonging to Chloe and her wealthy parents, parked alongside the more practical aging sedans of my mother church group. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just taking in the absolute lunacy of my brother and his desperate ego. Thick, bright orange extension cords snaked across my perfectly manicured front lawn, trailing from the rented yellow generator directly through the open living room windows. Because I had shut off the municipal water supply days ago, Greg had been forced to rent 2 portable outdoor restrooms. They were currently sitting at the end of my elegant brick driveway, looking incredibly out of place and smelling faintly of chemicals in the summer heat. I was hosting an upscale catered party for 50 people at a multi-million-dollar property that currently lacked basic indoor plumbing, central air conditioning, or running electricity. The sheer monumental arrogance required to maintain this fragile illusion was staggering. He was putting on a pathetic, desperate theatrical performance to convince his future in-laws that he was a highly successful real estate mogul. I took a deep, steadying breath of the warm summer air. The rich smell of expensive catered barbecue smoke drifted over the tall wooden fence, mingling with the exhaust of the generator. It was time to pull the curtain down on his ridiculous play. I bypassed the front door entirely and walked up the side stone path toward the heavy wooden gate that led to the backyard. The dull roar of the generator faded slightly as I unlatched the gate and stepped onto the pristine green grass of my own property. The backyard was absolutely packed. 50 guests were crowded onto the stone patio and the surrounding lawn. A local upscale catering company had set up a massive grilling station in the corner, filling the air with the scent of roasted meats and sweet barbecue sauce. A portable speaker system was blasting upbeat party music, trying unsuccessfully to drown out the constant hum of the diesel engine. I stood quietly near the edge of the patio, observing the crowd before making my presence known. Greg's friends were gathered near the coolers, holding expensive craft beers and laughing loudly, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. My mother church group sat rigidly in the patio chairs, fanning themselves furiously in the oppressive afternoon heat, looking deeply uncomfortable. But my eyes immediately sought out the most important targets of the afternoon. Chloe's wealthy parents were standing near the center of the yard, holding plastic cups of iced tea. They were dressed in impeccable country club casual attire, and they wore identical expressions of polite but severe judgment. They were clearly looking at the orange extension cords, the portable toilets, and the chaotic makeshift nature of the party with deep, wealthy suspicion. Chloe was hovering nervously beside them, trying desperately to keep the conversation lively and distract them from the obvious logistical nightmares surrounding them. Greg was holding court near the center of the patio, holding a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs like a royal scepter. He was wearing expensive designer sunglasses and boasting loudly to anyone who would listen about the impressive square footage of the property and his supposed plans to completely gut and remodel the kitchen. He was entirely consumed by his own fraudulent narrative, soaking in the unearned admiration of his friends. I did not try to sneak into the crowd. I simply walked forward, my black heels clicking sharply against the stone patio. I looked like $1,000,000 radiating the kind of undeniable authority that commands a room without speaking a single word. The conversations nearest to me began to die down rapidly as people noticed my arrival. A few of my mother church friends recognized me, and their eyes widened in sudden confusion, whispering quietly behind their hands. I kept my posture completely straight and my expression professionally blank. It only took about 20 seconds for my mother to spot me in the crowd. Barbara was rushing out the back door carrying a massive glass bowl of potato salad, sweating profusely in the summer heat, because the inside of the house was a dark, suffocating oven. The moment her eyes locked onto my tailored navy suit, all the color instantly drained from her face. She stopped dead in her tracks, nearly dropping the heavy bowl onto the stone patio. Her forced, cheerful hostess smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She shoved the bowl into the hands of a highly confused guest and practically sprinted across the yard toward me. She grabbed my upper arm with a grip like a vice, her fingernails digging painfully through the fine wool of my jacket. She tried to physically pull me backward toward the side gate, desperately trying to drag me out of sight of the wealthy guests. "What are you doing here, Hannah?" She hissed, her voice a desperate, venomous whisper. "You are not invited to this party. You are embarrassing the family. You need to leave right now before Chloe's parents see you causing a dramatic scene." I did not step backward. I planted my feet firmly on the stone and looked down at the hand clutching my arm. "Remove your hand from my jacket, Barbara," I said, my voice perfectly level and cold enough to freeze boiling water. She flinched physically, recoiling from the absolute lack of daughterly affection in my tone. She dropped her hand, looking at me like I was a complete stranger representing a terrifying threat. "You are going to ruin your brother's special day," she pleaded desperately, trying to block my path with her body. "He is finally proving to his future in-laws that he can provide a good life for their daughter. You have a fantastic corporate job and a nice hotel to stay in. You are completely fine. Why cannot you just let him have this one victory? Be a good sister for once in your life and walk away." "I am not a sister today, Barbara," I replied smoothly, adjusting my sleeves and looking directly into her panicked eyes. "I am a creditor." The sudden intense tension radiating from our corner of the patio had finally attracted the attention of the man of the hour. Greg noticed the quiet commotion and turned away from his captive audience. When he saw me standing there in my immaculate suit directly challenging our mother, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure aggressive rage. He threw his stainless steel grilling tongs onto a nearby table with a loud metallic clatter and marched directly across the patio toward me. His heavy footsteps echoed with arrogant entitlement. He puffed his chest out, trying to use his height and his physical size to intimidate me into submission, just like he had done since we were children. The party music seemed to fade into the background as the entire yard fell into a hushed, extremely uncomfortable silence. Guests were openly staring now, including Chloe and her highly judgmental parents, who were watching the family drama unfold with absolute disgust. "What the hell do you think you are doing here, Hannah?" Greg growled, leaning into my personal space so close I could smell the stale beer and barbecue sauce on his breath. "I told you to get your trash and get off my property on Monday. You have absolutely no legal right to be here. You are trespassing, and I will call the police and have you dragged out of my backyard in handcuffs if you do not turn around and walk away right this second." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stared directly into his angry, desperate eyes, and I allowed a slow, cold, triumphant smile to spread across my face. He had completely dug his own grave in front of the exact audience he wanted to impress. "I did not come alone, Greg," I said softly, raising my right hand into the air. I snapped my fingers, and from the shadows of the wooden side gate, the man who had been quietly walking exactly 3 paces behind me the entire time stepped fully into the bright afternoon sunlight. He was a licensed civil process server, wearing a crisp button-down shirt, and he was holding a thick, heavy stack of legally binding financial devastation right in his hands. The legal system moves incredibly slowly for most people. But when you walk into a courtroom alongside a seasoned real estate attorney and present a judge with irrefutable documented evidence of felony title fraud, combined with a defaulted commercial lien, the wheels of justice spin with terrifying speed. My attorney, Richard, handled the emergency injunction hearing on Wednesday morning. Greg did not even bother to show up to the courthouse. He had no legal representation. He had no defense. He was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of the $350,000 debt he had fraudulently assumed. The presiding judge took exactly 5 minutes to review the revoked power of attorney my mother had used to forge my signature. He examined the corporate structure of Oakwood Financial and the clear violation of the due on sale clause. With a single sharp strike of his wooden gavel, the judge officially voided the fraudulent quitclaim deed. The physical title of the property was immediately restored to my name. But more importantly, because Greg and my mother were now classified as unauthorized hostile occupants, engaged in documented fraud, the judge granted a rare emergency eviction order. There would be no 30-day grace period. There would be no lengthy appeals. They had stolen a multi-million-dollar asset, and the court was throwing them out onto the street. Exactly 1 week after the disastrous housewarming barbecue, the final hammer fell. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning. I took another personal day from the financial firm and parked my reliable sedan across the street from my house. I sat behind the steering wheel, drinking a cup of black coffee, and waited. At precisely 9 in the morning, 2 heavy white sport utility vehicles with the County Sheriff Department logo emblazoned on their doors pulled into my long brick driveway. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out of the vehicles. They did not look like they were there to negotiate. They marched directly up the front walkway, completely bypassing the massive yellow fines the Homeowners Association had taped to the front door and pounded heavily on the solid oak wood. I rolled down my car window and listened. Greg opened the door. He was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a stained white shirt. The arrogant, puffed-out chest he had displayed all weekend was completely gone. He looked exhausted, pale, and terrified. The lead deputy handed him a thick stack of court orders and spoke in a loud, authoritative voice that carried clearly across the quiet suburban street. The deputy informed my brother that the property deed had been voided by a judge. He stated that Greg and my mother were officially trespassing on private property. The deputy then delivered the words that finally shattered their delusional reality. He told them they had exactly 30 minutes to gather their essential personal belongings and vacate the premises immediately. If they were not off the property in 30 minutes, they would be placed in handcuffs and arrested for criminal trespassing. I stepped out of my car and walked slowly across the street. I stood at the edge of the manicured green lawn, watching the absolute chaos unfold inside the house. The front door was propped wide open by a deputy who stood in the threshold with his arms crossed over his tactical vest. From the sidewalk, I could hear my mother sobbing hysterically. She was running up and down the hardwood hallway, frantically shoving her expensive silk blouses and imported Italian shoes into cheap cardboard boxes. Greg was rushing back and forth from the garage, dragging garbage bags full of his designer clothes and video game consoles. The sheer panic in their movements was the direct consequence of their own unbridled greed. They had tried to throw my life into garbage bags on my birthday. Now they were experiencing the exact same indignity under the strict supervision of armed law enforcement. Suburban neighborhoods thrive on quiet gossip and hidden drama. Flashing police lights on a Tuesday morning are an absolute magnet for attention. By the time the 20-minute mark rolled around, the audience had arrived. Mrs. Gable from the house next door suddenly decided her pristine front porch needed sweeping. Mr. Henderson from across the street was walking his golden retriever at a remarkably slow pace, lingering right at the edge of my property line. A few other neighbors had stepped out of their front doors, holding coffee mugs, openly staring at the spectacle. My family had always been obsessed with appearances and reputation. They were currently losing both in real time in front of the very people they wanted to impress. At exactly 9:30, the deputies forced them out. Greg dragged 2 massive black garbage bags down the front steps. His face was flushed dark red with supreme humiliation. He refused to look at the neighbors. He refused to look at the deputies. He threw his bags into the trunk of his beat-up older car. Chloe had driven away in her luxury sports car on Saturday, taking all of her wealth and status with her. Greg was left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back and a massive impending fraud lawsuit. My mother emerged last. She was carrying a cardboard box overflowing with her expensive perfumes and framed church group photos. Her face was streaked with running mascara. As she stumbled down the brick walkway, she noticed the neighbors watching her from the sidewalk. The realization that her perfect, pious matriarch persona was being publicly destroyed flipped a desperate switch in her brain. Instead of keeping her head down and leaving quietly, Barbara decided to play the ultimate victim card one last time. She dropped her heavy cardboard box onto the grass. She turned toward Mrs. Gable and the other gathered neighbors, letting out a loud dramatic wail of pure manufactured grief. "Look at what my own daughter is doing to me," my mother cried out, pointing a trembling finger directly at me as I stood silently by the curb. "She is throwing her own mother out into the street. I gave that girl everything. I raised her. I loved her. And she brings armed police to drag me out of my home. She is a cruel, selfish monster." Mrs. Gable frowned slightly, clutching her broom. A few of the other neighbors exchanged highly uncomfortable glances. The cultural conditioning of suburban America is strong. People naturally want to side with a weeping older woman. They want to believe that family should always forgive family. The narrative my mother was spinning was incredibly dangerous because it was designed to make me the villain of my own survival story. I did not scream at her. I did not try to argue logically with a woman who specialized in emotional manipulation. As a senior bank auditor, I know that defending yourself against a lie only gives the lie more power. The only way to destroy a false narrative is to introduce irrefutable objective evidence. I walked calmly up the driveway, stopping just a few feet away from where my mother was performing her tragedy. The neighbors leaned in closer, trying to hear my defense. I did not say a single word. I reached into the pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the audio files. I selected the recording I had made while standing in the hallway on the night of my 33rd birthday. I turned the volume all the way up to maximum, and I pressed stop. The clear, unmistakable sound of my mother hushed. Frantic whisper echoed out of the small speaker, carrying easily across the quiet morning air. "Change her locks on Monday while she is at the firm," my mother voice hissed from the phone. "The paperwork is filed. It is your house now." I watched Mrs. Gable's eyes widen in sheer shock. I let the recording continue playing the exact moment Greg laughed arrogantly about how I was supposed to be the smart one. Then the most damning part of the audio played loud and clear for the entire neighborhood to hear. She is incredibly naive when it comes to family. My mother's voice continued dripping with toxic condescension. She trusts me implicitly. Just get a locksmith out here by noon on Monday. I will pack up Hannah clothes in black garbage bags and leave them on the front porch. She can afford to rent a small apartment downtown. It makes much more sense for you to have this big house. I stopped the recording and slipped the phone smoothly back into my pocket. The silence that fell over the front lawn was absolute and heavy. The manufactured tears on my mother's face dried up, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. She realized that her most intimate, treacherous thoughts had just been broadcast to the people she desperately wanted to impress. The mask was completely gone. Everyone standing on that sidewalk now knew exactly who Barbara Dixon truly was. She was not a loving mother being victimized by a cruel daughter. She was a calculating thief who had plotted to render her own child homeless to benefit her unemployed son. Mrs. Gable gripped her broom tightly, shaking her head in deep disgust. She turned her back completely on my mother and walked quickly back into her house, slamming her front door shut. Mr. Henderson pulled his golden retriever away from the property line, looking at my mother like she was something rotten left out in the sun. One by one, the neighbors turned their backs and walked away, refusing to offer her a single ounce of sympathy. She was totally exposed and completely alone. "Get in the car, Mom," Greg muttered, his voice thick with defeat. He did not even try to defend her. He just wanted to escape the suffocating public shame. My mother picked up her cardboard box, her hands shaking violently. She did not look at me again. She could not look at me. She shuffled over to Greg's car and climbed into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut behind her. The deputy stood back as Greg started the engine. The car idled roughly for a moment before he put it in gear. They drove slowly down the street, turning the corner and disappearing from my view. They were heading toward a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. It was the only place they could afford with the few $100s they had left in their accounts. They had traded a rent-free life in a multi-million-dollar home for a dark motel room, all because they could not resist the urge to steal what was freely given to them. The sheriff deputies approached me, handing me the official eviction paperwork and confirming that the property was legally secure. I thanked them for their professionalism. They returned to their heavy vehicles and drove away, leaving me standing completely alone on the front lawn of the house I had purchased 6 years ago. I walked up the brick path and stepped through the front door. The house was dead quiet. The utilities were still shut off. The air inside felt stale and heavy, holding the lingering scent of my mother's expensive perfumes and the faint smell of the garbage bags Greg had dragged across the floor. I walked through the living room, tracing my hand along the edge of the kitchen island, where my mother used to serve me breakfast with a fake smile. I walked down the hallway where I had stood on my birthday, listening to them plot my destruction. I had won the war. I had executed a flawless financial trap. I had reclaimed my property and watched the people who abused me face absolute public ruin. But as I stood alone in the center of that massive house, I realized something deeply profound. The walls were still beautiful. The hardwood floors were still pristine. The natural light still poured through the tall windows. But the space felt incredibly hollow. Every single room held a memory of a lie. Every corner contained an echo of a betrayal. They had not just tried to steal the physical structure. They had fundamentally tainted the sanctuary I had built. I had won the house back, but the house simply did not feel like home anymore. The morning after the county sheriff deputies permanently cleared the property, I returned to the suburban house. I walked through the heavy oak front door, and the silence that greeted me was absolute. For 6 exhausting years, this structure had been the physical manifestation of my financial bondage. Every polished hardwood floorboard, every custom-painted wall, and every expensive stainless steel appliance represented a massive sacrifice I had made to buy the love of a family that never actually wanted me. I stood in the primary guest suite where my mother Barbara had lived rent-free. I looked at the expansive walk-in closet she had filled with luxurious clothes bought with my hard-earned grocery money. The air in the room felt stagnant and heavy with the ghosts of their entitlement. I realized right then that I did not want to reclaim this house. I did not want to sage the rooms or hire contractors to repaint the walls or pretend the ultimate betrayal had never happened. The sanctuary had been violated beyond repair. I wanted to liquidate the asset entirely. I contacted a premium real estate agent that exact same afternoon. She was a sharp, highly successful woman who walked through the property and marveled at the immaculate condition of the kitchen, the bathrooms, and the professional landscaping. Because the suburban housing market was incredibly competitive, she strongly advised me to list the property immediately. We did not even bother with professional staging companies or expensive cosmetic upgrades. The sheer size and pristine upkeep of the house spoke entirely for itself. We formally listed the property on a Thursday morning. By Saturday evening, we had received 14 highly competitive offers. 10 of those offers were entirely in cash and well over the original asking price. I sat in the mahogany boardroom of Richard Sterling Law Office 2 weeks later to sign the final closing documents. It was a deeply poetic and profoundly satisfying moment. The last time property paperwork had been filed for this specific address, it was a forged felony document designed to destroy my entire life and leave me homeless. This time, it was a legitimate, highly lucrative commercial transaction that was about to set me entirely free. I signed my name on the dotted line with a steady hand. A few hours later, a massive wire transfer hit my personal bank account. It was a staggering amount of money. The return on my original investment was enormous. I had successfully secured my financial future for the rest of my natural life, while the toxic people who tried to steal it were currently sitting in a cheap roadside motel with absolutely nothing to their names. I took that massive financial profit, and I completely severed my geographical ties to the suburban nightmare of my past. I purchased a sleek, ultra-modern condominium in the absolute center of the downtown financial district. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece located on the 32nd floor of a high-security luxury building. The space featured dramatic floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city skyline and the distant waterfront. The floors were polished concrete. The kitchen was a minimalist masterpiece of black granite and custom cabinetry. It was not a traditional warm family home. It was a sophisticated executive sanctuary designed for a woman who valued her peace above all else. Moving into that downtown condominium was the most liberating experience of my entire 33 years on this earth. There was no sprawling green lawn that required constant expensive maintenance. There was no massive dining room table designed for tense, ungrateful family gatherings. And most importantly, there was absolutely no guest bedroom. I deliberately purchased a spacious one-bedroom unit. I wanted to mathematically ensure that no toxic relative could ever show up on my doorstep demanding a place to stay. The space was entirely, unapologetically mine. I filled it with modern abstract art, plush leather furniture, and thriving indoor plants. Every evening, I would sit by the massive glass windows, drink a glass of expensive imported red wine, and watch the city lights flicker to life far below me. The building had a 24-hour concierge and restricted elevator access. I was completely untouchable. While my life was ascending into the clouds, my older brother Greg was experiencing the brutal, crushing weight of the criminal justice system. The county district attorney did not look kindly upon real estate fraud. Forgery of a property deed, using a revoked medical power of attorney, is a highly serious felony offense. During the preliminary hearings, Greg desperately tried to play the victim. He tried to convince the prosecutors and the judge that it was a simple family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He wore cheap suits to court and tried to look remorseful. But the crystal-clear audio recording I had captured on my birthday, combined with the irrefutable paper trail, left him absolutely no room to hide his malicious intent. Facing the terrifying prospect of a lengthy state prison sentence, Greg was forced to accept a strict, unforgiving plea bargain. He officially pleaded guilty to felony wire fraud and title forgery. He barely avoided a prison cell block, but the judge sentenced him to 5 years of highly supervised probation. He was legally ordered to pay thousands of dollars in court fines and mandatory restitution. Because he was now a convicted felon on public record, his grand delusions of being a successful technology entrepreneur were permanently annihilated. No legitimate financial institution would ever lend him business capital. No respectable corporate partner would ever associate with a man convicted of stealing property. The wealthy elite social circles he had desperately tried to infiltrate with his former fiancée were forever closed to him. The last piece of reliable news I heard through the quiet suburban grapevine was that Greg was working the overnight shift at a local industrial warehouse. I was spending his nights loading heavy cardboard boxes onto freight trucks just to afford the monthly rent on a tiny basement apartment. The arrogant king of the castle had been rightfully reduced to a convicted felon doing manual labor in the dark. Barbara did not fare much better in the aftermath of her ruined scheme. Without my massive corporate salary to fund her daily life of absolute leisure, she was violently forced to face the harsh reality of her own incompetence. 4 months after the sheriff executed the eviction order, I was sitting at my kitchen island enjoying a quiet Sunday morning. The early sun was pouring through the massive windows, warming the concrete floor. My cellular phone vibrated across the black granite countertop. The caller identification displayed an unknown local number. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, wondering if it was a work contact before answering. I did not say a word. I just brought the receiver to my ear and waited in the silence. "Hannah, please do not hang up the phone." The voice was cracked, desperate, and completely stripped of its former matriarchal arrogance. It was Barbara. The sound of her voice did not trigger a sudden wave of panic or childhood fear. It just felt incredibly distant, like listening to a sad ghost from a past life. "I am in a terrible situation, Hannah," she pleaded, her voice shaking with genuine, unmanufactured panic. "The motel manager is kicking me out today. Greg absolutely refuses to answer my calls because he blames me for his criminal record and his ruined engagement. I have absolutely no savings left in my bank account. My church friends will not even look at me after what happened at the barbecue. They completely excommunicated me from the congregation. I just need a few $1,000s to secure a small apartment, just to pay the security deposit and the first month of rent. You sold the house for an absolute fortune. I know you have the money in the bank. I am your mother, Hannah. I raised you. You cannot just leave your own mother out on the street to starve." I sat perfectly still and listened to her desperate, manipulative rambling. I thought about the 6 grueling years I had sacrificed my youth, my vacations, and my peace of mind to pay her expensive utility bills. I thought about the heavy tray of baked ziti I had cooked on my own birthday while she stood in the kitchen actively plotting to throw my professional clothes onto the porch in trash bags. I thought about the cruel, dismissive tone she had used when she texted me to be a good sister for once and sleep in a cheap apartment while Greg stole my multi-million-dollar asset. She had built her entire comfortable life on my silent suffering, and now she expected me to rescue her from the very trap she had built to destroy me. I did not yell at her. I did not demand an emotional apology for the fraud. I did not offer her a single ounce of closure or debate her maternal logic. The senior bank auditor in me simply reviewed the emotional ledger and found her account permanently overdrawn. "I am sorry, Barbara," I said, my voice perfectly calm and remarkably light. "You must have the wrong number." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to terminate the call before she could utter another manipulative syllable. I immediately blocked the unknown number in my phone settings, ensuring she could never reach my personal device again. I set the phone down on the cold granite counter, picked up my hot cup of coffee, and went back to watching the morning sun illuminate the beautiful city skyline. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The toxic emotional umbilical cord had been permanently severed. She was no longer my responsibility. She was just a stranger dealing with the miserable consequences of her own terrible choices. The true ultimate test of my new life arrived in late November. The holiday season had always been a source of immense psychological anxiety and forced domestic servitude for me. I was always the one cooking the massive turkey, scrubbing the fine china, and keeping my mouth shut, while Greg insulted my career. But this year, I decided to completely rewrite the holiday narrative. I hosted my very first Thanksgiving dinner in my beautiful downtown condominium. I did not invite a single person who shared my genetic bloodline. Instead, I invited the incredible people who had truly supported me when my world was falling apart. I invited my brilliant real estate attorney, Richard Sterling, and his lovely wife. I invited 4 of my closest professional colleagues from the financial firm who had covered my corporate audits during the chaotic legal battle. I invited my old college roommate, who had always seen the true parasitic nature of my family long before I was brave enough to admit it. I hired a private chef to cater the evening because I was done slaving over a hot stove for the benefit of others. The evening was absolutely magical. We did not use formal stuffy china or pretend to be high society aristocrats to impress wealthy neighbors. We drank fantastic imported wine, ate incredible roasted food, and laughed until our ribs physically ached. The ambient music playing through the sound system matched the bright, cheerful energy of the room. There was no heavy, thick tension hovering over the dining table. There were no passive-aggressive insults, disguised as helpful maternal advice. There was only genuine warmth, absolute professional respect, and unconditional emotional support. As I looked around the spacious room at these wonderful, successful people raising their crystal glasses to toast my beautiful new home, I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over my entire soul. For 33 years, I had desperately tried to earn basic love from people who were entirely incapable of giving it. I had foolishly believed that sharing a last name meant I owed them my hard-earned money, my personal space, and my sanity. But sitting in that vibrant room, surrounded by genuine laughter and unwavering respect, I finally understood the absolute truth. I spent my first holiday with a group of close friends, realizing that blood doesn't make a family, loyalty does. I had survived the ultimate familial betrayal, and I had built an impregnable fortress of financial and emotional peace in its direct aftermath. I was no longer the silent, exhausted family automatic teller machine. I was no longer the naive, pushover sister who accepted disrespect to keep the peace. I was Hannah Dixon. I was a highly successful senior bank auditor. I was a wealthy property owner who controlled her own destiny without needing permission from anyone. And as I looked out over the glittering lights of the city, I knew that for the first time in my entire life, I was completely undeniably free. I sit by the massive glass window of my downtown condominium and watch the morning sun rise over the city skyline. The coffee in my mug is hot. The room is perfectly quiet. And for the first time in my 33 years of life, my shoulders are completely relaxed. There is no heavy mortgage weighing down my chest. There is no impending sense of dread about what financial disaster my brother has created today. There is no lingering anxiety about what my mother will demand from me when I walk into the kitchen. The absolute silence of this beautiful space is the most expensive thing I have ever purchased, and it is worth every single penny. Looking back as a 33-year-old woman, the clarity I have now is almost blinding. As a senior bank auditor, I spend my entire professional life looking at ledgers, balancing accounts, and tracking the flow of complex investments. I am trained to spot discrepancies. I am trained to notice when numbers do not align and when corporate structures are being manipulated for personal gain. But for 6 long years, I completely ignored the most toxic, fraudulent ledger in my own personal life. I allowed my family to bankrupt me emotionally and financially. I paid the heavy suburban mortgage. I paid the escalating property taxes. I paid the strict homeowners association fees. I paid the utility bills, bought the expensive groceries, and funded a lifestyle of absolute leisure for people who viewed me as nothing more than a convenient paycheck. I sacrificed my vacations, my youth, and my peace of mind because I fundamentally believed that family was supposed to take care of family. I thought my relentless generosity would eventually be rewarded with genuine love, respect, and loyalty. I was completely wrong. I realized that trying to buy my mother's love by paying her bills only funded my own disrespect. Every single time I wrote a check for the electric bill, I was actively telling her that her comfort was infinitely more important than my own financial security. Every time I looked the other way when she secretly transferred my hard-earned grocery money to my chronically unemployed brother, I was teaching them that I was perfectly willing to be used. I thought I was building a permanent safety net for the people I loved. In reality, I was building a luxurious cage for myself, and I was willingly handing them the key. They did not respect my hard work. They did not care about the 60-hour weeks I spent at the financial firm to keep the roof over their heads. They simply saw my bank account as a natural resource that existed solely for their exploitation. When you give absolutely everything to people who feel entirely entitled to your sacrifices, they do not see you as a generous benefactor. They see you as a highly convenient appliance. And when that appliance stops working exactly the way they want it to, they do not hesitate for a single second to throw it out onto the street. The rainy night of my 33rd birthday will forever be the defining moment of my entire existence. Standing in that quiet hallway, holding a heavy glass tray of baked ziti that I had paid for and cooked with my own exhausted hands. Listening to my mother and brother casually plot to hire a locksmith and lock me out of my own home. That was the exact moment the grand illusion of blood loyalty shattered completely into a million unrecoverable pieces. They were actively willing to render me homeless, just so Greg could play the role of a highly successful homeowner for his wealthy, judgmental fiancé. They were willing to throw my personal belongings onto the front porch in black trash bags, because they firmly believed I was weak enough, naive enough, and broken enough to just walk away and rent a cheap apartment in silence. They deeply mistook my kindness for stupidity. They mistook my long years of silence for permanent submission. But that profound betrayal, as devastating and deeply painful as it was in the moment, was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It forced me to wake up from a lifelong nightmare. It forced me to take the cold, calculating, and ruthless skills I used in corporate audits and apply them directly to my own treacherous family. When I sat in the office of my real estate attorney when I executed that flawless financial trap, when I let my arrogant brother claim the physical title of the house and unwittingly assume a $350,000 fraudulent debt that triggered an immediate hostile foreclosure, I was not acting out of petty, immature revenge. I was executing absolute, undeniable justice. I was taking back the massive power I had surrendered for 6 agonizing years. Watching them lose absolutely everything in front of the entire neighborhood, watching the fake pious matriarch persona of my mother crumble on the front lawn, watching my bully of a brother face the brutal, terrifying consequences of felony real estate fraud. It was not just a victory. It was a complete psychological exorcism. I purged their dark toxicity from my life permanently. It took a massive, perfectly orchestrated legal battle and a staggering emotional toll to get to where I am sitting today. But the hard lessons I learned are etched permanently into my soul, and I desperately want to share them with you. I know there are so many of you watching this video right now who understand exactly what I went through. Many of you have spent decades acting as the invisible foundational pillar for a family that completely takes you for granted every single day. You have drained your own retirement savings accounts to rescue adult siblings who absolutely refuse to work. You have housed demanding, ungrateful aging parents who constantly criticize your life choices while sleeping soundly under the expensive roof you provide for them. You have swallowed your own tears, canceled your own plans, and ignored your own fundamental needs because society has relentlessly conditioned us to believe that family is a sacred, unbreakable bond that must be preserved at any physical or emotional cost. I am sitting here today to tell you with absolute certainty that this societal conditioning is a massive lie. The core message you need to internalize today, right this very second, is this: you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you should never set yourself on fire to keep people warm who would happily watch you burn. Let those heavy words sink deeply into your mind. You cannot pour from an empty cup. For 6 long years, I poured my money, my time, my physical energy, and my sanity into my mother and my brother. My cup was bone dry. I was chronically exhausted, highly stressed, and running on absolute fumes. And instead of offering to help me refill my cup, my family simply complained bitterly that I was not pouring fast enough. They demanded more living space, more grocery money, more storage for luxury wedding gifts, and more endless accommodations. When you surround yourself with emotional and financial vampires, they will never ever be satisfied. They will consume every last ounce of your goodwill until there is absolutely nothing left of you but an empty shell, and then they will turn around and blame you for being empty. Do not set yourself on fire to keep them warm. My mother lived rent-free in a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, completely shielded from the harsh realities of the economy, all because I was setting my own future on fire to provide that unnatural warmth. I was actively burning my own chances at early retirement. I was burning my own opportunities to travel to rest and to enjoy my youth. And when they sat in my kitchen and plotted to change my locks and throw me out into the cold November rain, they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they would happily watch me burn to ash if it meant they got to stay comfortable for a few more days. You owe absolutely nothing to people who treat your personal destruction as a minor inconvenience on their path to comfort. When I finally hired my attorney, when I initiated the aggressive foreclosure proceedings through my private limited liability company, and when I had the county sheriff arrive with flashing lights to physically execute the eviction order, my mother stood on the curb and called me a cruel, selfish monster to anyone who would listen. She tried desperately to convince the entire neighborhood that I was an ungrateful, terrible daughter victimizing a helpless older woman. That is the universal, predictable tactic of the abuser when they finally lose their unearned control. They will weaponize your inherent goodness against you. They will try to make you feel like a terrible, unforgiving person for simply demanding basic human respect and enforcing legal justice. You must learn to silence their toxic voices in your head. You are not cruel for refusing to be a victim. Boundaries are not a betrayal. They are survival. When I sat at the kitchen island and firmly refused to clear out my own garage for Chloe and her luxury wedding gifts, that was a boundary. When I opened my laptop in a hotel room and systematically cut off the electricity, the water and the high-speed internet to my own house, that was a boundary. When I stood in my own backyard wearing a tailored suit and had a licensed process server hand my brother a financial death warrant in front of 50 shocked party guests, that was the ultimate unbreakable boundary. I was no longer protecting them from the devastating consequences of their own illegal actions. I was finally protecting myself. And protecting yourself from toxic, manipulative family members is the most vital, essential survival skill you can ever develop in this life. You do not owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. You do not have to sit through agonizing holiday dinners where you are mocked and treated like a servant. You do not have to answer desperate phone calls from relatives who only reach out when their bank accounts are overdrawn and they need a bailout. You have the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to liquidate the asset, sell the house, pack your bags, and move to a high-security condominium where they cannot ever reach you. You have the right to choose your own family. The people I spent my first real holiday with in my new home, my brilliant attorney, my supportive professional colleagues, my true friends, they are my real family. They do not demand my money. They do not plot against me in my own kitchen behind my back. They celebrate my successes, support my ambitions, and treat me with unwavering, genuine respect. Blood does not automatically grant someone a permanent all-access pass to your life. Blood simply means you share basic genetic material. Loyalty, respect, consistency, and mutual care are what actually forge a true family. If the people who share your last name are entirely incapable of providing those fundamental things, you are fully authorized to revoke their access to your life permanently and without a single ounce of guilt. The long journey from being a terrified, exhausted family automatic teller machine to becoming a fierce, independent woman who successfully defended her own financial empire was the hardest, most grueling thing I have ever done. But sitting here today, watching the busy city wake up far below me, I know that every single tear, every drafted legal document, and every harsh public confrontation was entirely worth it. I am physically safe. I am financially secure. I am deeply loved by the amazing people I chose to let into my life. And above all else, I am completely undeniably free. If you are watching this and you have ever been the family ATM, or if you have ever had to legally protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family? Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Remember, you deserve to be safe in your own home. See you in the next story.